Hello and welcome to the Stormant Sources podcast, where we take you inside politics at Stormant and we cover everything going on in the world of politics. Locally, joining me today, I have my two regulars. We have two esteemed former special advisors. I'm going to use the slogan that Tim loves, Northern Ireland's most listened to political panel. We have Michael McKernan, former special advisor to the SDLP from 2007 to 2016. Hello, Michael.
Hello, David, and in anticipation, hello, Tim.
And a nice cue up there. We have the former special advisor to DUP First Minister Peter Robinson. Hello, Tim.
Hello, David. If we are Northern Ireland's most listened to political panel, does that mean we're the biggest show in the country now? Especially since Stephen Nolan's lost all that weight. We're definitely by weight the biggest show in the country now.
I'd say nothing.
Okay, we'll just leave that alone. On the podcast today, we're talking about the most recent LucidTalk poll in the Belfast Telegraph. It shows some worrying signs for the executive parties, and it shows some other interesting findings about the UUP leadership and about who Unionist voters want and who they're actually going to get. Then we're going to be talking about the recent dispute in the Assembly this week with Gordon Lyons. Yes, the Communities Minister was back in the headlines for all the wrong reasons as an ombudsman report found that he had breached the ministerial code. We'll be looking back on the week and we'll be asking, did he do anything wrong? Is the report right? All that and more coming up on this edition of Stormant Sources. Just remember, you can go and watch any of our clips on TikTok. You can go on X. There's a myriad of different ways you can look for us. Just remember to search for Stormant Sources. You also see our videos on YouTube if you prefer seeing our faces rather than listening to us. Just head over to YouTube, search for Stormant Sources, and you'll find us there. Thank you to the north of 1,000 people who have subscribed to our channel. Keep it coming, by the way. Show the love, and you can see all our latest clips if you do hit the subscribe button. So please make sure you do whilst you're there. On to the first topic of this week's podcast. We're going to be looking at the recent LucidTalk poll in the Belfast Telegraph. We are getting into election season, whilst we may not go to the polls until May of 2027, unlike our sister podcasts on Senate and Holyrood, who are going this May, we're going next May. But we're getting into election season and we are focusing on what the poll is saying and what does it tell us, given the fact that we are now just 14 months out from the beginning of the campaign for the next Assembly and local government election. The recent poll has some interesting findings. So we have Sinn Féin leading. They're on track to retain the First Minister's position. They come in on 24%. The DUP are on 19%, so they're still below the 20% mark. But the most fascinating part of the poll for me is that we have four parties, yes, count them, four parties, in between 11 and 13%. So we have the Ulster Unionist Party on 13%, and then we have the TUV, Lyons, and the SDLP on 11% each. So the five main parties, it is incredibly, incredibly competitive, particularly down for third place. So I'll start off with you first, Tim. What did you make of this poll in terms of party support? It did other polling around UUP leadership, which we'll get to, but just give me your views on the party scores.
I think I should say before I give you the view on that is Whitehall sources will have some election chat or not election chat, depending on whether local government elections go ahead as well. So people should tune into that.
Gold star for you from Callum.
English. You forgot about the English local government elections. I know you only like your nationalist parties, but there are other parties that people
English people forget about Northern
across
Ireland enough. So there we go.
The United Kingdom. So just thought we'd just Mr. Elections needed to be checked there, I think.
That's okay. Can I extend my apologies to all five people who will turn out for the English local elections? I'm sorry for forgetting you. Sorry. Continue.
I think a few more people will turn out than that and will cast their vote for reform and give Labour a bloody nose. That's all the analysis you need on English local government elections. Okay, the LucidTalk. The LucidTalk
15
poll,
minutes later.
the LucidTalk poll, I think it's interesting how things are breaking down, particularly that middle ground and amongst some of the smaller parties. Actually, it's not something that's got a lot of commentary. The Greens are really not making any breakthrough at all, it seems. I mean, I know there's a lot of high hopes within the Green Party that some of things...
4%'s not bad for them, though, Tim. They've averaged about 2 in
Well, they were
recently.
2% in the last election. They've got themselves to 4%, and they've stuck. I mean, this is the third or fourth LucidTalk poll in a row where they've been stuck at 4%. So they're not benefiting from the Alliance Party, who've come down from, they were at, I think, a height 16, 17% in a LucidTalk poll. Those votes are not coming to the Green Party. They're staying the centre ground, SDLP, Alliance, Ulster Unionist. That area has become very crowded, as you've pointed out. Greens into People Before Profit, they're not parties that are picking up some of the dissent at the centre. And I think that's quite interesting, particularly for the SDLP. We'll get on to talk about, I think, the approval ratings of some of the folk in the Assembly, ministers and leaders of the opposition. In terms of the big parties, Gavin, and we've said this before, Gavin, when he was on our podcast last June, he said he was going to sort out the internal structures of the party, the stuff you can't see. And then come September onwards, he was going to be reaching out on this stuff you can see into the public to try and gain a better foothold for the party. Now, that seems to have been a strategy of taking a lurch to the right. But what I think the DUP didn't factor on was Jon Burrows. Nobody factored in that. In June, when Gavin was on our podcast, Jon Burrows was someone who came on to news programmes to opine about policing issues in Belfast. He was seen as somebody who was very articulate. He was seen as somebody who was very good on those security issues that he discussed. Nobody believed, or nobody would have reckoned, that he would be an MLA within the Ulster Unionist Party, and never mind an MLA within the Ulster Unionist Party, that he would now be leader of the Ulster Unionist Party. So I think the DUP, their lurch to the right, has to be seen within the prism of Jon Burrows' action over the autumn period as well. Now, and it's going to be interesting, I think, going forward, as to the DUP has solidified their position in and around 19%. The DUP needs to get to at least 21.5%. If the DUP are going to hold all the seats that they have, they need to get to there's 21.3% they got in the last election. They need to at least match that in the Assembly election next year if they're to hold their seats. So at the moment, I wouldn't be panicked at all. If I was in the DUP, I'd be saying things are going in the right direction. But I would certainly be thinking Jon Burrows wasn't factoring into my plan when I was setting this plan down last June, and how's that going to affect us?
Well, when you consider there's about a 2.5% margin of error, 19%, the DUP could really not have moved. They could really not have moved from. And also the interest, I was looking through some of the trends of the polls, just polling history in Northern Ireland. One thing I have noticed is that the SDLP and Alliance come down in campaigns. So they poll well going up to campaigns, but then they come down. The DP and Sinn Féin, they go the opposite way. Sinn Féin were...
And TUV, of course, as well. They come down when it
Sinn
gets to
Féin were
campaign
polling
time.
around 24%. Believe it or not, from that record result they had in May 22, they started the year at about 24, and people thought, well, oh God, could they even hold the seats that they had from 2017? And they went up. The DP, remember some of those polls had the DP on 17%. Actually, fun fact, it was 5 years ago this month, the same LucidTalk poll that showed the DUP down below 20%. That was the panic poll that made the push against Darlene Foster.
Was the first poll, yeah.
She was gone. She was gone 3 months later.
I think if I was in the DUP, I'd be looking at this and I'd be thinking the TUV are probably going to drop down to about 8, and we're probably going to gain that. I would be thinking the DUP's on about 22% coming election.
Okay. Michael, party scores, and then we'll unpack the rest.
Yeah, well, I think this is one of the most unremarkable political polls I've seen in a long time. There is so little change. If you're looking at party affiliations, the change is from the last time. Nearly everybody's on the same as what they were the last time, with a little bit of leakage from TUV, 1% down to the DUP, and 1% down to the Ulster Unionists, who are both up 1%. So that's what's happened in this polling period. It brings to mind the words of Lurgan's finest son, George Russell, when he said, "We were happy and dead, you and I." And I think it reflects a sort of deadness in our politics, a flatness. I think our politics are flaccid. And I think the person who should be most worried, nobody should really be that worried, but the person who should be most worried is Jim Allister, because the TUV have come down a mark. And I think Jim Allister isn't cutting the mustard here because he's in Westminster. And even though he's a very able deputy in the Assembly, he's not on Nolan every morning going on about all the lies the DUP are telling and all the misleading over Brexit and all of that. That's kind of gone away. And unless he comes back into the fray here more visibly or more vocally and starts beating up the DUP the way he was before, I see that trend continuing. I see the DUP pulling back more and more votes from Jim Allister. And of course, this is proven solidly when politicians leave the North and they go to Westminster, even though it's a step up, it's a bigger job than being an MLA, it's the end of your career as an effective leader. Look at Michelle Gildernew, shafted by Sinn Féin by putting her in Westminster. In the DUP, Peter Robinson shafted Sammy Wilson, Gregory Campbell, packed them off to Westminster to be never heard of again. And Tim, no doubt, has the inside track on this, but Gavin Robinson is very keen to get out of Westminster and get back into the Northern Ireland Assembly, where he can really be a top leader. I think the rest of the parties won't be too worried, and they won't be too happy, because our politics are dead and flat.
Okay, well, hopefully our listeners didn't just switch off there in their droves when we were talking about
I would just say,
non-remarkable
picking up on Michael's point there, I would be shocked, absolutely shocked, if Gavin doesn't come back.
A couple of things to unpack though in the poll. So the party scores are roughly not massive change with where they are. I mean, if the election was held today, Sinn Féin would be back in the First Minister's spot, which I suppose Michelle getting re-elected, so Sinn Féin could spin that as a victory. The DUP, if they can hold their ground. The Alliance Party is interesting in this because you have the SDLP and Alliance literally line ball with each other, right? And the interesting thing is they're both very transfer friendly, right? They're both incredibly transfer. So they will be going hammer and tong at each other, because Alliance in this case will be defending incumbent seats. You're looking at the SDLP who are going to be going on the offense. Michael, just stick with this.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to make for a very interesting contest, isn't it?
Yeah, Tim, you have put your finger on the only other interesting thing in this poll, and it's not so much party affiliation, it's the ratings of the ministers and other figures in the Assembly. The big loser, although I question the range, the highest is 47% and the lowest is 33%, and normally the gaps between top and bottom would be much greater than that, but maybe that's just the solidity of the LucidTalk methodology, I don't know. But in any event, the big loser in that is Naomi Long. I think we predicted that on the pod, that the shine had come off Naomi, and we expected that to come through in the polls. And the big winner, apart from Mike Nesbitt, is Matthew O'Toole, whose role as leader of the opposition, I think, is now getting through to people. And we debated whether or not Matthew's outstanding performances in the Assembly chamber would lead to any cut through with the electorate. And on the basis of this poll, it looks like there is cut through. And it's interesting, as you say, the battleground between the SDLP and the Alliance Party is now going to be really interesting as to transfer-friendly parties. And it was shown in the Assembly when, if you remember, Naomi Long has got herself stuck on some of these issues with funding the police and the barristers' dispute over pay. And she came out and explained that some barrister was earning a fortune, got the numbers wrong. But even apart from that, she was only making a point that the barristers had too much money or something. Whereas what came out from what she actually said was that the money that's spent on barristers isn't distributed very evenly, and that's maybe the problem. But anyway, Matthew O'Toole criticised her along the lines of saying, look, all you're interested in doing is winning a debate rather than solving problems. And Naomi, instead of rhyming off all the problems she may have solved, attacked them back and said, that's just a personal attack on me, you're just attacking my character. So I think Naomi's a bit rattled at the moment, and I think Matthew O'Toole is on the edge of a breakthrough with the wider public. He's no longer the nuisance or pest to be dismissed by the first and deputy first ministers or the two big parties. He's now carrying out a serious constitutional role and doing it really well.
Okay, and Tim, let's go through the party scores, the ministerial scores that are there. The most popular minister there is Mike Nesbitt. Of course, he's on a 47% approval rating. Again, he is as popular. He's kind of popular with all three demographics. So Alliance and Green voters. He's also popular with nationalist voters. He's also popular with unionist voters as well. So he's 47.
Well, not really. I mean, he's by far the least popular unionist minister. Actually, I completely disagree with that. Mike actually, I read these figures as problematic for Mike. You might be the most popular minister in Northern Ireland, but you're by far the worst rated unionist amongst unionists. So, you've got to go back. The headline figures are meaningless. They're absolutely meaningless because we do not vote as a bloc, as a whole community bloc in Northern Ireland. We vote as unionists and nationalists and others. They're the only scores that matter. This idea that Mike Nesbitt's the most popular politician in Northern Ireland and that matters tuppenny halfpenny, it doesn't. Mike Nesbitt's sitting on an approval rating of 47 with unionists. Now, to put that in context, Emma Little-Pengelly's 58, Gordon Lyons is 63, and Paul Given is 62. Paul Given, who's risen over the last year amongst unionists. Gordon Lyons is someone who's gone down amongst unionists, and we know that Emma Little-Pengelly has gone down amongst unionists as well. And Mike Nesbitt is sitting like 11 percentage points below the next rated unionist minister. So these are not great figures for Mike Nesbitt. We can say, he's the most popular minister, but that's because he's maintaining a popularity with nationalists and others that the other unionists don't care. No unionist needs the others and nationalists to factor in their popularity. It's within your community that matters. Now, interestingly, just to pick up on Michael's point in terms of Naomi Long and in terms of Matthew O'Toole, I mean, it is inconceivable to believe if we were sitting doing this podcast 2 or 3 years ago, and I was to say that Naomi Long would be sitting as the least popular minister in our executive, you wouldn't believe it. You would be laughing at me. Now, for her, troublingly, she's usually pushing up beyond the high 60s into the 70s within the other category, within her own electorate's category. She is now sitting at 55%.
Tied with Matthew O'Toole,
she has tanked. Matthew O'Toole, I was just about to say, is exactly as popular as her. Matthew O'Toole's figures are incredible. 31 percentage points among unionists, 60 percentage points among nationalists, 55 percentage points amongst others. I mean, Matthew O'Toole actually is the clear winner in this by some considerable distance. I think to be sitting at 31% within unionists as a non-unionist, as a nationalist, in fact, is quite an incredible score to achieve. So I think it's the data that lies behind. I mean, I know that the newspapers and radio programs have been focusing on the headline data of who's the most popular. That is utterly meaningless. It's who's popular within the community that they represent. For Naomi Long, she's not popular within the community she represents, and she's not popular with nationalists, and she's certainly not popular with unionists. I think she's got a big problem.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you break them down about, who's winning, who's losing. I mean, the DUP ministers, as you're saying, for unionist voters, are clearly the vote getters. Same thing within nationalism. The Sinn Féin ministers are not badly approved. Yes, Matthew O'Toole has a better rating overall than Michelle O'Neill, but within nationalism, she sits at
Michelle
60.
O'Neill is the most popular minister in Northern Ireland.
Yeah,
so she has 68 within her community.
68 within nationalism. And Keith Archibald and Don O'Dowd within nationalist voters are also ahead of Matthew O'Toole.
64 and 64 even. Yeah.
So the Sinn Féin, Liz Kimmins, I think, is the only one that is below Matthew O'Toole's rating. So if you're a Shinner watching that, you'd be looking at that going, great. But again, it's that Alliance SDLP battle that's going to be the interesting one, because if you are... Yeah, because Claire Hanna was scoring similar. She was more popular with Alliance stroke Green voters than Naomi was as well in a previous poll. So if you're the SDLP and you're looking at that, you're going, Matthew and Claire are potential for those Alliance voters. Why do we think then, and Michael, I'll go to you on this. I mean, this time, it was about this time, it was going back to that panic poll just because it was so consequential, not because of the impact it had within the DUP. That poll was showing Alliance firmly coming into third place, and Alliance stayed in that for the rest of the year, and then it came to pass in the Assembly election. Their party conference is coming up in March. What can Alliance do over the next 15 months to lift that score? Because Alliance got 13.5% in the last Assembly election. I mean, we can overdo these things when we look at the data behind it. They're actually not a million miles off where they were at the last Assembly election. But what can they do to lift themselves up to those 14, 15, 16, 17% that we typically
they can go into opposition and lead the opposition. They're being totally ineffectual as ministers. Not their own fault. It's not that they're not hard-working or well-intentioned. They're not being allowed to do the things that they need to do by the larger parties, by the overall executive, and they should deliver an ultimatum on the things they need to do on Loughney and on justice. And if they're not allowed to do them, if they don't get executive sign-off, they should walk. They would then lead the opposition and they would be able to reconnect with their previous theme of "you deserve better," which was very successful for them. So I don't think they will do that, but I think that's what they should do if they want to recover. It's the reason for their slide, because they're not cutting the mustard in office, and they craved office for decades and it was beyond them, and now that they have it, they're not delivering.
I think their core vote, but the core alliance members, so to speak, not the people who are voting for them in the periphery, they want their alliance party representatives in there and making decisions and being part of it. So I think the alliance have a tension in that their core membership, their core vote, the DNA of that vote going right back to the early 70s is to be there, to be at the table, and to be the moderating influence from the inside. That's the DNA of the Alliance Party. But I think Michael's absolutely right. People who have come to the party in recent years have come to the party because they liked what Naomi Long was saying. They liked what Saoirse was saying. They liked what Alliance representatives were saying of, we're going to bring change. We're going to put it up to them. We're going to make this place better. And then they look at it and they say, well, you haven't done anything that's better than what anybody else was doing. So voting for you didn't make things better. So I think they have that tension. Their new voters want them to do things and make a difference. Their core DNA says, no, we need you at the table. Now, they need to sort that out. And I think that's why Naomi Long is tanking in the polls. Now, if Alliance do, of course, say, we're not going in, we're going to be the opposition, it creates a little bit of a constitutional crisis. And I wonder how we sort that out between the DUP and Sinn Féin in and around who's going to take that Ministry of Justice. Because don't forget, that ministry sits outside of the normal D'Hondt process. Yeah. And Alliance have been useful. And we've seen Claire Sugden being useful to avoid that constitutional crisis. What if the Alliance stayed out? What would happen in that constitutional crisis? And I suspect their core DNA support, their core members, don't want Alliance Party to be the ones who create a constitutional crisis in Northern Ireland, because that's anti the Alliance Party.
I agree with that.
And that's why they have this tension.
And that's why they're caught, because there's an alliance. Because when Sinn Féin walked out in 2017, when the DUP walked out in 2022, there was a core of their votes that will reward the walkout. So whether it was the protocol for the DUP, I think a lot of core DUP voters went, absolutely, we can't be putting up border posts in Larne. We can't be doing that. That's absurd. Same thing for Sinn Féin. Well, a whole bunch of their voters think this place is unworkable anyway, so they just think, thank you for bringing down the facade. But Tim, I think you're right. I think you're right. The Alliance Party voter, the cross-community voter, the person who wants to believe that this place can work and that we should work together, I think if Alliance walk out, that is not something that they get rewarded for at all. I don't think that's something that's enough.
I agree with that analysis that Tim said out there. That is the DNA of an Alliance person. It is the DNA of most SDLP people as well, but they would have to leave and make it look like a constructive move, that they're not wrecking, they're not trying to undermine the institutions. They think they can be actually more effective delivering for their people from opposition. That's how they would have
the
to
DUP
sell it.
Are not going to let
but I agree, it's difficult.
the DUP aren't going to let Sinn Féin take justice, and Sinn Féin aren't going to let the DUP take justice. So unless Sinn Féin agree again to Claire Sugden, and I don't think they would.
No, I don't think
unless there's a Green Party MLA who comes in and he might say, well, you know what? This gets us a seat at the table, and we may as well do it and see how we fare, have a crack. We are in a deep constitutional crisis, and that's the problem for Alliance. However they spin it, they've created that crisis. Now, I think that's unfair on them.
Yeah.
Let me be very quick to say that.
Ulster Unionist
Alliance members. Well, but will Sinn Féin agree to an Ulster Unionist? And I don't think they will. Because I don't think Sinn Féin would agree to Claire Sugden next time, who's the most benign of Unionists. So
not about the most benign of Unionists. It's why can't the Nationalists hold the Ministry of Justice?
And it's a great question probably for another podcast, but I do think that the Alliance Party are not going to allow that constitutional crisis to happen, because that's not who they are. And I don't think they would be able to spin it any other way. And look, for the record, I mean, for the podcast that we do talk about the Justice Ministry, I mean, I think something needs to be sorted out. I think justice should be in the normal D'Hondt. I don't think it's this huge, ministry that is of critical importance. I think it's like the Department of Finance used to be, much has been made of its importance, and
That's
its
right.
importance is nil.
Now,
So it is.
something else that is noteworthy in the poll, and we'll just close off on this because I know we've talked a lot about the UUP leadership, and Jon Burrows is set to officially become the UUP leader.
Never has a leadership in the UK ever been more discussed
Yes.
than the Ulster Unionist Party. I think if Keir Starmer was to go tomorrow, there'd be less talk about the leadership of the Labour Party.
I mean, but there's been probably a bit more drama in the UUP in terms of the internal machinations, and Jon Burrows, kind of counter offensive, his outside offensive, for the UUP leadership. But LucidTalk did survey Unionist voters on who they would have preferred as the UUP leader, and the results are great for Jon Burrows, pretty bad for Robbie Butler. So maybe he's made the right call by standing aside. So all Unionist voters, Jon Burrows came in at 53%, to Jon Burrows 27%, and 20% registered a don't know in there. Now, when you break that down to UUP voters, 56% of UUP voters prefer Jon Burrows to 34% for Robbie Butler, and 10% of them don't know. So that is, from a polling point of view, Tim, that is pretty decisive in anyone's language. You can't really argue with those numbers. So
the one that I think would be key for Jon Burrows is that it makes it more likely for a transfer to the Ulster Unionist Party with Jon Burrows as leader. I think that really is a key metric. So Jon Burrows makes the party more transfer friendly in unionism, and it doesn't have the effect, I think, that some people thought of people choosing not to transfer to the Ulster Unionist Party from outside unionism as well. So I think Jon Burrows is in a strong position. He's certainly in a strong position to get transfers across the piece, and he does seem to be polling, certainly on this poll anyway, that he seems to be polling well. Now, the one thing I would say is, what's interesting to me, and just going back to the overall party scores, we've made a joke about the amount of attention Jon Burrows got through this leadership campaign. This poll was conducted right in the middle of the Jon Burrows storm, and it didn't eat into the DUP's vote. So that's the only word of caution I would have. Right at the height of Jon Burrows being out there, being platformed, being shown clearly someone in this poll who's popular, clearly someone in this poll who's a position of strength, but it did not translate to an Ulster Unionist swing away from the DUP.
Well, there was a little Burrows bounce in the poll because the 1% extra the UUs got, they probably did get it from the DUP, and the DUP got 2% from TUV. The poll makes it look like it was 1% each from TUV, but probably 2 to the DUP from TUV and 1 to UUP from DUP.
This is one of the interesting things about the UUP, and we've noted it before, is that even with the leadership issues they've had, they're 13%, 12%. They've always hovered around that. It just has not hurt them at all. All these internal machinations, it really hasn't hurt them. So it'd be interesting to see, can Jon Burrows within, by this time next year, I suppose, when LucidTalk polls are coming out, can Jon Burrows have shown a steady increase? So are the UUP consistently registering around 14-15%? Because if they are doing that, that will end up doing damage to the DUP if they can do it. Because the big problem for the TUV have, the 11% score that they have, you can look at it two ways. Yeah, they're 2 points behind, but the TUV are so on-transfer friendly that you would still give the UUP the advantage to be miles ahead on seats, and that'll be the issue. That'll be something that Alliance Party have in their favour. That Alliance could conceivably come just behind the UUP on votes, but still get more seats. Why? Because Alliance get better transfers than the UUP get.
TUV voters who are you would think should transfer already. It's up over 40% or more now, more likely, highly likely to transfer to the UUP because of Jon Burrows' leadership. So I think you'll see, when TUV candidates drop out, is it likely now, because of Jon Burrows, that the TUV votes are going to go to the UUP and bypass the DUP? And is that then problematic for the DUP whenever they're maybe fighting out for a last unionist seat with the UUP? I think those sorts of little things could be interesting.
Yeah, and we'll keep an eye out for those. And we are still a good bit away from the assembly election, but it's always good to talk about a nice poll. I like polls. We don't get enough of them in Northern Ireland. But look, Gents, thanks very much for going around on that. This is the Stormant Sources podcast. After the break, we will be back with Tim and Michael, and we'll be discussing the recent Assembly Standards Commissioner report into the Communities Minister, Gordon Lyons. This is the Stormant Sources podcast. We're back talking about another big story that erupted this week. And again, Gordon Lyons seems to be at the centre of a lot of these things. It either tends to be Gordon Lyons or Paul Givan. They tend to be the ministers who come at the centre of this. You remember a couple of months ago, we discussed this on the podcast about Gordon Lyons' Facebook post that was published in June. This was after immigrant families were forced to flee their homes in racially motivated riots that took place in Ballymena. Now, there was a report into this by the Assembly Commissioner for Standards, which has basically found against Gordon Lyons. The report concluded that Gordon Lyons' post may, quote unquote, have heightened tensions and contributed to further unrest during the riots. Gordon Lyons has denied this, and Gordon Lyons has said that I reject that completely, and there is no evidence to back that up. There was a pretty contentious debate in the Assembly about this on Monday. Gordon Lyons hit back. He was fully backed by his party leader, Gavin Robinson, and again, from a resignation standpoint, that is kind of all she wrote within the Northern Ireland system. But something that was interesting was that obviously it contributed to the bad tone. We had Kit Nicholl, of course, on last week, reflecting on the tone in the Assembly, and this report and people's reactions to it certainly didn't help. But I'll start off with you first, Michael. Gordon Lyons was straight out of the traps on Monday. He was on the Nolan Show. He was on Talkback. He was in the Chamber. And, he was kind of taking on all comers. So, pretty bullish.
Yeah, I guess so. First thing I would say is that I'm kind of inclined to defend people who hold prominent office, high office, where their wrongdoings are relatively minor misdemeanors. I think there's too much of a media culture of going after, our politics, UK-wide is all about who'll be the next to get fired or resign or whatever, rather than looking at the substance of what a minister's doing or what a politician's actually saying. The news is all about who's resigned. Like Robert Jenrick was making the news because he'd been fired by Kemi Badenoch. Keir Starmer, there's just constant speculation about when he's going to get shafted. And it was Andy Burnham this week was going to shaft him, and then a couple of weeks ago it was Wes Streeting. So we're obsessed with, same is true in sport. Soccer's no longer about who won the game, who played well. It's all about which manager's getting sacked. So let me enter that at the very outset. I don't think we should willy-nilly expect people to lose their positions because they do stupid things. Now, if you although it depends how much they do it. If you take the case of Gordon Lyons, making a fool of himself with his housing targets up and down and all over the place, forgivable. Producing a laughable poverty strategy condemned by just about everybody with an interest in the subject, even that's forgivable. And failing to get the money out even to not just Casement Park, but to Cliftonville or Glentoran, even when the money's in his piggy bank, he's giving it back because he can't get it out the door. Forgivable. Taken in the round, it's not a good picture and people will be entitled to ask questions. So along he comes and Facebook makes, at the very least, an incredibly clumsy observation on Facebook. And it's now been investigated, and the Assembly watchdog has said he's in breach of the Ministerial Code, and that the impact of his posting could have been quite severe. If they're effectively saying that he heightened tensions or fanned the flames or whatever it is, I think that is a pretty serious, finding. Now, DUP, we have the system where ministers don't have to go anywhere unless their party leader loses confidence in them. The party leader's fully behind Gordon Lyons. So that's kind of the end of the matter anyway. You can debate it till the cows come home. He's not going anywhere. But I think it probably, taken all his other faux pas and taken this one, when you read the posting, it's pretty hard to put a benign construction on it. Yes, you mightn't put the malevolent construction on it that some have put on, but it's pretty hard to make sense of it in a positive way. So I think it doesn't really matter what I think. I think he should go, but I know he won't. So I thought Paul Given should have gone over the Israeli love-in, but I never thought for a moment that he would go. So that's where we are. The system politics we have. Our ministers don't get fired and don't leave. I think Paisley Jr. might have got fired, and then Tim, you're minister over the heating thing. But other than that, ministers are largely indestructible while they maintain the confidence of their party.
I think for accuracy, Paisley Jr. resigned, and Jonathan Bell was long out of office.
He was long out of office when it came out. Yeah. I mean, well, just two observations. First of all, it'd be great to be line managed by Michael, wouldn't it? Just like, he's very forgiving, so he is when he goes through all the KPIs and says failed. But then, Tim, in terms of the ministerial accountability piece, I know you weren't a fan of the report.
Critchell Down has long gone about it. That is now just for wizened, dusty old university professors like you with patches on their elbows to, cry back to the days of ministerial accountability. It is dead. It is dead.
Okay. What do you think of the report?
Well, I agree with Michael, actually. I do think our knee-jerk response to everything, anybody in public offices, they must be fired. They must lose their job, whatever it is in society. And it's not just politicians or football managers. This pervades the Twitterization of our society. Anybody does anything wrong, and it's the equivalent, the modern day equivalent of the mob turning up at your house with pitchforks and torches. It's Twitter. They have to lose their job. Somebody makes some innocent mistake, do something that's a bit foolish, and Twitter's all over it. They must be fired. And I think we have come to the point now where it is tiresome, these calls for people to be fired. Look, I think there's a couple of observations. Number one, we're not very different in this part of the world to other parliamentary democracies around the world. Pick your parliamentary democracy. People serve at the pleasure of the Prime Minister. People are only fired or hired at the pleasure of the Prime Minister. Votes in Westminster on ministerial actions or non-actions are non-binding on the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister fires you or you resign. I mean, that's literally it. And in Northern Ireland, it's exactly the same. Your nominating officer, not the Prime Minister, but just by the vagaries of our system, it's your nominating officer. They hire you, they fire you, or you resign. That's literally it. We are no different to anywhere else. So let's get rid of this idea. There's somehow Northern Ireland exceptionalism. We're a silly little place apart where ministers can't be fired. That's the same in the House of Commons. That's the same in most parliamentary democracies around the world. So let's end that debate. It's nonsense. You serve at the pleasure of your nominating officer just in the same way as someone serves in the cabinet of the British government at the pleasure of the Prime Minister. Now, coming to Gordon Lyons. I mean, Michael's laid out a number of misdemeanors as he sees them, and
he's forgiven them,
and he's forgiven them all except a hastily written Facebook note. Now, look, I think I think Gordon's phrasing in his Facebook note, and I've said this publicly, probably unfortunate, probably should be taking a bit more care on what he said. But if we're into the realms now where if you don't show empathy, what standard of empathy? How much empathy? Is that too little empathy? Is that too much empathy? I think if that's where we're at, where ministers stand or fall in their social media posts by how much empathy they show, well, my goodness, we really have entered into a weird world of politics. Some people will think Gordon Lyons' post was as empathetic as it could be. Some will think it was the most dispassionate, unempathetic Facebook post that's ever been written in the history of Facebook. That's the nature of Northern Ireland. The reality is, Gordon Lyons' Facebook post did not incite any violence. Gordon Lyons' Facebook post was pretty clear. Violence, not pretty clear, was absolutely clear. Violence is not something that should be tolerated. Now, if you think he should have gone a bit further and said, my heart goes out to the people who have been displaced from their homes, sure, maybe he should have said that. Or maybe you think that he should have been a little more fulsome in
definitely, Tim,
as the minister.
He should have said that. For goodness sake, he's a communities minister. And there's a community under attack by racist thugs.
I'm not
he's more interested in telling people where they're hiding out.
Well, he was actually saying the opposite. He was saying they weren't there. He wasn't. It was exactly the exact opposite of it. You see, there we go, Michael. This is it. People are presupposing he said something he didn't. He didn't say they're at the leisure centre now. Peacefully protest, lads. No violence. He said they're not at the leisure centre. They're away from the leisure centre. They're miles from the leisure centre.
If you go to the leisure centre,
if you go to the leisure centre, you're a balloon.
Rather than condemning the attacks on them.
I mean. So he was saying the complete opposite of where they were
at.
He
was commenting on their whereabouts.
Well, no, they're not at the leisure centre. They're in the care of the housing executive. See, this is the problem. People presuppose that Gordon Lyons, and I think this is the problem with the report. The report is assuming that Gordon Lyons had motives that he may or may not have had. I would make loads of assumptions about that Facebook post, but only one person really truly knows what that Facebook post was about. And I think, is it clumsily worded? Yes. Could he have worded it differently? Yes. Could he have said a line, look, my heart goes out to the people who've... Absolutely. Should he have done that? Yes, of course he should have. But at the end of the day, this Facebook post was not something that was inciting violence. It was not saying, lads, get down to the leisure centre and kick off there, which is what people would say that he said. He didn't say anything even approaching that. Now, should he have worded it better? Yes. Is it some sort of breach of the ministerial code? I think we're now getting into the realms of crackers. So we may not like Gordon. We may not like things that he does or says. I think that's immaterial. I think, if we're judging the empathy that a minister has, I think now we're into the realms of madness. In my view, Gordon did a good job, is doing a good job as communities minister. I think he's had a few stutters, a few stumbles along the way. I think he's learning from them.
A few?
Have I had a few stutters? Yes, he's had a few stutters and stumbles along the way. I think he's learning from them. I think he's an effective minister, and I think maybe that's why some people in the nationalist community are getting a bit rattled.
Is Gavin Robinson feeding you these lines, is he, Tim?
I'm just saying it. I'm saying it the way I say it, David.
I think that's a lot of nonsense. He's been a pretty poor minister. He's bungled his way, issue over issue, policy over policy. I'm saying I'm not accusing him of what some may be accusing him of, because as you say, it's what his intention was in the tweet, and I'll take him at his word that he wasn't intending to fan the flames, etc., etc. I'd accept that. But when you add that completely clumsy and inappropriate posting that caused all the consternation, and which has been found to be in breach of the Ministerial Code, to all his other faux pas, I think Gavin Robinson ought to make a change. That's what I think.
Well, I think
it's not just only that one. It's all the other ones that on their own could be individually forgivable. But when you take the whole package, Gordon Lyons has made a nonsense of this job.
I think we could probably end here in a little bit of agreement. I think we could say that Gordon probably should have this week, when he was out doing his media rounds, have admitted that he clumsily worded his Facebook post. I think I wouldn't have seen that as weakness.
It would have helped. It would have helped.
I think if he said, look, in hindsight, I don't believe I breached the ministerial code, but in hindsight, as someone who was rushed and hurried that day, I would, if I could have my time again, I would phrase my Facebook post better, but I don't see that as a breach of the ministerial code. I think that would have helped him a little bit this week, and I think he probably should have done that, because that's my view. My view is, look, this was a clumsily worded Facebook post. I said this at the time. He should have worded it better, but you know what? We've all issued clumsily worded tweets and Facebook posts. And so, I don't think what he did was a breach of the ministerial code, except that's what the Standards Commissioner has said. But I think they're wrong. This is not a breach of the ministerial code at all. This is a clumsily worded Facebook post. Okay. Just do better when you're tweeting on social media.
Right. Okay. Well, look, we'll close it off.
I'm just wondering, Michael, do we have agreement?
Well, I agree it was clumsy, and on its own, I don't know what was in the man's head when he wrote that. The Standards Commissioner.
Shanae, isn't that what we say?
Shin and scale.
Shanae. Okay. I thought Shanae was agreement.
Well,
what's Shanae?
Shanae is,
Michael?
Is done.
Oh, it's done. Okay, so with Shanae, we're done.
We're done.
Okay.
That's it.
Shanae.
Right, and that is good, and that is the word of the moment. So we'll wrap it up there. Look, thanks very much for going around the houses. That's all we have time for this edition of Stormant Sources. Just remember, you can get in touch with us and comment on anything that you're listening to or watching on YouTube. You can contact us on 0333 404 6507. Remember to use the word Stormant. Leave us a voice note as well if you're so minded. You can also drop us an email, hello@stormantsources.com. That's all from Tim, Michael, and myself. We'll see you next week.